Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Men these days forgive female promiscuity. They give female promiscuity a pass because men have large egos, and men think that they can fuck a girl into submission, into her being enamored with him, etc. And men want to stick it to her past boyfriends by being the one who was able to make her stay. Stay with him, right? She had all these boyfriends before, but he was the one who made her stay. He was the one, right? Men, forgive female promiscuity because of this, right? Men thereby incentivize promiscuity, or at the very least give it a pass. This increases female impunity and empowers women and disempowers men, thereby making all of society more dysfunctional and everyone more miserable. But if men were more loyal to each other like they used to be throughout most of human history, then this desire of men to screw over other men would not disempower all men, because men would set up structures to enable them to compete fairly. Because men have a natural dominance competition type of instinct, right? Men want to dominate women, but men also want to dominate other men because men have to fight other men to get women, right? Or at least that's how we evolved. I mean, monogamy was kind of a way of getting around that so that everybody could get a woman without fighting, right? But, but even still under monogamy, there's still a struggle to get the best woman possible, right? At the very least, the most attractive one possible, or the one who's good looking and has a good personality, good character, right? So men kind of have to make themselves the best they can to compete with other men to get the best woman possible, right? But, so men have this instinct to dominate women and dominate other men, or compete with other men, in other words. But, there's such a thing as, competing fairly, such as, things used to be in society, or competing unfairly, such as how things are now, where the whole system is rigged to benefit the rich and screw the little guy, right? So, under, a system where men were in power, men would set up structures to enable themselves to compete fairly with other men, right? Because if it's fair competition, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just unfair competition that is the problem, right? Bros before hoes is an essential mantra that all men need to adopt and ingrain in themselves. But of course, everything is now set up to favor backstabbing, and thus it is difficult to get a virtuous cycle going. Women would not be able to get away with being promiscuous if men were not so willing to throw morality away in order to get laid. Men need to become moral again, or else chaos will be the result in society, because their current misandric gynocentrism is not going to last. We can only have a system this feminist, this insane, this misandric for a short period of time, and then men, fight back and then it ends, right? Women and the psychopathy that goes along with their unrestrained behavior, their unrestrained hypergamy, their unrestrained promiscuity, their unrestrained anger, their unrestrained impunity and criminal behavior, etc., etc., etc. This is going to be put down again. Women and their psychopathy is going to be put down again like a rabid dog. But the main question is whether men will build something better to replace the current system, the current society, something that works for all men and therefore for all women and therefore for all of society, or whether men will continue being short-sighted, hedonistic, selfish by valuing sex over other men, etc., meaning, they don't mind fucking women, even virgins, and then discarding them and creating more psychopathic women who are going to divorce rape men because those men don't care about other men. This is what I mean by selfishly valuing sex over other men, right? They value getting sex more than they value the well-being of other men, right? So if men continue being short-sighted, hedonistic, selfish by valuing sex over other men, and thus drive society into violent chaos, that's the other option, right? Like, either we replace the current system with something better and get something that works for all men and therefore all women and therefore all of society, or men will just continue being ignorant and asshole-ish and stupid and hedonistic, and society will descend into violent chaos. Women's only value is sex, and thus men have to decide a few things. The top 20%, or maybe the top 10%, or maybe the top 5% or top 1% of men need to decide whether a promiscuous society where all the women are only available to the top men is worth the violence and chaos that will exist in such a society, as the vast majority of men revolt against such a society. Because such a society only works for the men at the top, and the men at the bottom and the men of the bottom 80% need to decide whether sexual access to women is worth fighting for, right? And I'm not implying that it is. I'm just saying that the bottom 80% of men, or the bottom 90%, or the bottom 95%, or the bottom 99% of men need to make this decision. You know, is it worth us to risk our lives to fight to overthrow the government, to, you know, get women back, and or, you know, get, you know, freedom and prosperity and peace and all the rest of it? Or is this worth it, right? Or is it worth it to just keep our heads down and try to survive, right? And let the elites keep being in control and keep hogging all the women more and more and more as time goes by, because their wealth will get greater and greater and our poverty will get greater and greater. And then women will just be going for, you know, maybe now women are only going after the top 20% of men, right? But soon women will be only going after the top 10% of men. And then as things get even worse in society, even more poverty, and the rich get even richer and the poor get even poorer, then women will only start going after the top 5% of men. And then things will get even worse, and then women will only be going after the top 1% of men, right? And different things will happen at that time. Women, you know, a lot of women will start to wake up and will realize that, oh, you know, we can't all get the top 1% of men, even if we all share and each man has, you know, 5 wives, we still won't all be able to get the top 1% of men. Not to mention those men don't even want all of us. They don't even want half of us, right? So those women will then start lowering their standards and getting with guys of the 99%. I'm just saying, like, as this gets worse, women will be narrowing which men they really want more and more and more, right? So men need to decide whether their women are worth fighting for, and the elites at the top need to decide whether it's the top 20% or the top 1% or the top 0.01%. The men at the top need to decide whether, you know, getting as many women as they want is worth having society that is full of chaos and violence and perpetual revolution and war, you know, as the bottom 80% or bottom 99% of men are constantly trying to overthrow the elites because of the fact that they're not getting any sex, and the bottom 99% of men are now incels, or maybe only the bottom 50% or the bottom 60% of men are incels or whatever, but a huge percentage of the population will become incel in the future because of, you know, everybody becoming so poor that no one can afford a wife and no one can afford kids, right? So when this happens, you know, it'll be endless war, endless chaos, endless violence in society, and the elites need to decide whether that's the top 20% of men or the top 1% of men. These top men need to decide whether a society of endless civil war is worth being able to, you know, fuck as many women as they want, right? Because, you know, if you're a man who wants a sane society, you have to realize, if you have a brain, you will realize that you cannot, you know, be one of those guys who goes around, you know, fucking hundreds of women, right? Like, you may be smart enough, you may be good looking enough, you may have the energy, you may in every way be able to get that many women and fuck hundreds of women over a period of, you know, 10 or 20 years. You know, I'm talking 200, 300, 400 women, maybe 600 women. You're able to fuck hundreds of women, right? Like, you may be able to do that, but you're going to have to realize that if you don't want perpetual civil war, perpetual revolutionary war, then you're going to have to compromise with the rest of men and be like, okay, I will be willing to just limit my access to women, right? Like, instead of, you know, fucking hundreds of women and not being with anyone, I'll limit myself to having one wife and maybe 2 or 3 mistresses. Or maybe you'll just, if you're a really honorable person, you'll just, you know, limit yourself to just one wife and no mistresses, right? So this is what the top men will have to decide, whether hogging all the women, you know, each man at the top having hundreds of women that he fucks, you know, or whether that's worth having civil war, or whether it's worth it to compromise to have a peaceful and fair and sane society that's not in perpetual war against itself, but you'll have to, you know, make the compromise of not being with so many women. Right, so both the men of the majority at the bottom, you know, the bottom 80% or the bottom 99% of men, and the men at the top, the top 20% of or the top 1% of men, these two groups of men will both have to decide whether it's worth it or not. Right, so this needs to be said. You know, right about now you may be objecting because I seem to be implying that, you know, maybe the bottom 80% of men are incels, but while the bottom 80% of men may not be incels right now, as the middle class continues to disappear, like I was saying before, the bottom 80% of men will be forced into inceldom / incelhood, or whatever the proper term would be, assuming they don't revolt before then. Peasants value their lives and revolt when they have trouble getting the basics of life, things like food, shelter, medicine, clothing, sex, etc. So as technology gets more advanced, it becomes easier and easier for people to get the basics like food, and thus it gets easier and easier to placate the common people, and thus it gets harder and harder to get people to revolt. Or it takes a greater and greater degradation in functionality of society before things will become bad enough to where people cannot get food, and thus they are motivated to revolt. Thus, either the slavery system gets stronger as technology advances, or each crash, or what? Oh yeah, yeah. What was I saying that? Or each crash? Oh yeah, right. Or each crash as an empire. Like you know how there's a cycle of empires, and then each empire crashes. So either we get a slavery system that gets stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger as technology advances, and it never gets weaker, or we'll just have like every crash, every time an empire falls and crashes, it'll be worse than before. Perhaps putting human survival itself, the survival of the human species in greater and greater danger each time an empire collapses, right? If the top 20% of men are foolish enough to take the side of the elites, let's say the 0.01% of men, then instead of the side of the 99.99% of men, if the top 20% of men are foolish enough to take the side of the elites, then the one will be on them because then the one will be on them. What? Oh god, this fucking autocorrect, it's always fucking shit up. I don't know what I was trying to say there, but yeah, the joke will be on them. That's probably I think what I was trying to say. Yeah, the joke will be on the top 20% of the men who try to take the elites aside because the bottom half of that top 20% will be edged into the lower class life, and then they won't be the top 20% of men anymore. It'll be like the top 20 and the bottom 80, and then it'll be like the bottom. Right now we've always had a large middle class, right, and then a few serfs, and then a few rich people, right. But the middle class is disappearing, and the serfs are getting larger and larger. There's getting to be more and more peasants, right, super poor people, right. So these people, the top 20% of men, if they take the side of the elites, they're going to be really foolish because what'll happen is they'll get edged out, and they won't fall into the middle class. They'll fall into serfdom, and they'll become peasants. And they'll go from being really well off to being not well off at all, barely surviving, right? And then the fall itself will be extremely emotionally traumatic for them. A lot of them will commit suicide. They won't even know how to survive at the bottom, right? They won't know all the survival techniques, and they won't have any, connections, allies to talk to and stuff, right? To help them out, a safety net. They'll have no safety net, so when they fall into the serfs, they might end up killing themselves, right? So it'll be really foolish of the top 20% of men to take the side of the elites, but I bet a lot of them will. And then a lot of them, maybe let's say the bottom half of that top 20% will be edged into the lower class life along with the bottom 80% that are all serfs and that they thought were not worth allying themselves with, right? Then the bottom half of that top 10% of men that's left will be edged out. And they will also find themselves among the very low class of people at the now bottom 95% of people. Then the majority, that remaining 5% at the very top, will be edged out, and they will find themselves among the now even further impoverished 99%, who at that point will be basically serfs. Or they will be serfs before that, but they'll be even more serfs at that point. They'll be even more poverty-stricken. And then the majority of that top 1% of people will be edged out. And then they will find themselves abjectly impoverished as well. Among those who are, they'll find themselves among those who can barely survive as well. Each time, the people at the top all think that it won't happen to them. They all think that they're smart enough, savvy enough, indispensable enough to make the cut, but they won't. And those who do make the cut will assume that they will also make the next cut, even though many of them won't. And on until almost everyone has been pushed into the utterly impoverished, utterly enslaved 99.99% of people. In other words, selfishness, ego, ambition, lack of principles / lack of morality, and the acceptance of the Darwinian view of life is what enables the elites to win. Selfishness, ego, ambition, lack of principles among the top 20% of men, right? Although also among the elites, right? And this is what divides the people and impoverishes everyone who is not in the top 0.01%, right? Because the people could take back power any time if they were just unified, right? If everybody wanted to overthrow the government, or if everybody decided to ignore the laws on smoking pot tomorrow, and everybody started smoking pot in public in front of the cops, every single person standing outside smoking pot, what could the cops do? Nothing. What are they going to arrest every single person in America? The idea itself is ridiculous. So the numbers are on our side. We can take back power anytime we want. It's only our ego and our selfishness and our lack of principles and our acceptance of this Darwinian way of life. Well, you have to kill or be killed, and I'm going to be at the top and fuck everybody else. That's the view that enables the elites to win in the first place. You see, without that, if we actually had cohesiveness, if we actually, had an own group preference as 99%ers, as men, as principled people, as people who want to have a decent way of life, regardless of how we agree about how that can be done, if we all agreed that we should all be able to live a decent life and that we should not be tyrannically enslaved, then we could all make it happen tomorrow, right? Mensa only accepts people in the top 2%, and only in terms of IQ. The 0.01% of humanity is far more exclusive than Mensa. Either men can wake the fuck up and realize that we're all in this together, and that we men need to stop having a callous attitude toward other men who are below us in intelligence, or below us in charisma, or below us in physical attractiveness, or who are below us in wealth, or in any other quality. We can, stop having a callous attitude toward other men who are inferior to us, or we men can all be enslaved. That's our choice. So we need to have a known group preference toward all men. And all people too, even women, because women are part of the 99%, most of them, and the 99% is at war against the 1%. So we should not drive them into the elites' hands, the elites' side further. We should get women on our side, whatever means necessary, so we can all live better lives, so we can all overthrow the government, you see? Because it's us or them. It's the 99% or the 99.99%, or it's the 0.01%. One of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose. And the consequences are going to be horrific for whoever loses. Enslavement and possibly eventually extermination is what we face. And they face, their heads on pikes, chopping off their heads and maybe public trials and killing them all because they were all totally psychopathic, right? That's what the elites face if we win, right? Like supposedly Hillary said, on election night or something, like, if we lose, they're going to have us hanging from nooses, right? Like, she viewed, like, the Donald Trump winning the election as being something that would, like, literally probably result in her death, supposedly. I don't think that's a quote that's, like, proven, but supposedly that's what she said. So this is how it is, right? The elites realize that, it's us or them. And they're the ones who pushed it to this point. It didn't have to be us or them, right? But they pushed it to this point by trying to enslave us and doing horrible things for a long, long time. So now it's really us or them. Either we're going to win and they're going to die, or they're going to win and we're going to die. It's really that simple. Men need men of all kinds. Alt-right, Antifa, Tradcon, MGTOW, it doesn't matter. All men need to wake the fuck up and realize that George Carlin was 100% correct when he said, it's a club, and you and I are not in the club. Now, he was talking about the elites. I'm sure you've seen that stand-up special of his. It's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. It's amazing, too. He makes so many good points. It's crazy. And he's hilarious, too. He's hilarious and very wise. And he's pointing out great stuff about, the badness of religion, the badness of or the ridiculousness of religion, and the evil of the elites and the politicians and stuff, and tyranny. I mean, George Carlin was amazing. He made so many good points, like moral points. He was basically like a crusader, like an activist for truth and sanity and humanity, right? And treating people humanely, right? That's what he was an activist for. And yet he was hilarious at the same time. I mean, George Carlin was amazing. Like when he died, the world lost so much. Like he was so important. Like it wouldn't surprise me if I learned, like, if we overthrew the government and got to read all the CIA's secret files, and then we got to find out that George Carlin was actually assassinated by the CIA. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying, like, if we somehow found out that happened sometime in the future, that we found out that that's how he died, that would not surprise me at all. Because someone like him is really doing a lot of good for humanity, right? Like, we lost so much when he died. It's really, really sad. What else do you say other than that, right? Men need to unite to oppose the elites. Men at the bottom need to stop striving to get into the top 20% of men and need to instead start trying to convince the top 20% of men that they had better join us, or else they are going to be as screwed as we are going to be if we do nothing. We the 99%. And we also need to make it exceedingly clear to the top 20% of men that if they turn us down and refuse to join with us and instead choose to ally themselves with the system, the government, the tyrannical oligarchical system, if they choose to ally themselves with it, because they think that they can stay at the top of the power pyramid no matter what happens, then we will consider them our enemies. And we will start a revolutionary war, and we will kill all the top 20% men, or at least a lot of them. And thus they had better join us, or else their lives will be forfeit when we get our hands on them. And we will. Because, like I said, most of the men in the top 20% will end up serfs, along with everyone else, as the elites slowly force everyone other than themselves to be cast out and end up becoming one of the serfs. And when they get to be, serfs like us, it'll be pretty easy for us to kill them, the top 20% guys, right? Or maybe we could get those top 20% men's sperm before we kill them, telling them that we will torture them and then burn them alive if they refuse to give us their sperm, and offer to kill them painlessly by beheading if they cooperate and give us their sperm. But then again, we probably wouldn't even need to threaten the top 20% guys once they're driven into serfdom, because, to get their sperm before we kill them, because it'd probably be just far easier for us to chain those top 20% guys up, immobilize their arms and legs, and then get an attractive lower 80% girl, or even a top 20% girl who's been forced into serfdom to, jack him off against his will, and then get his sperm like that, and then execute him. His above-average genes might be good to propagate by mixing with the genes of one of the lower 80% women of good moral character, especially since the father would be dead and could not pass on his bad morals to his son or daughter. His son would be raised instead by revolutionaries of the bottom 80%, revolutionaries who are trying to overthrow the elites. And thus that son would be raised to be a revolutionary and would be a help to humanity instead of a hindrance to humanity like his father was. This would probably be the best thing to do, because letting the top 20% men live, even though they side with the common people, would probably be unwise. But killing them without having them pass on their superior genes would also be a foolish thing for the revolution to do. P.S. The last thing I want to say in this video is that there's a part of the music video for Paramore's song Rose-Colored Boy that I find absolutely hilarious, and it illustrates female nature as well. Watch the video from about 1 minute and 55 seconds in until about 2 minutes and 8 seconds in. That part from 1 minute 55 seconds until 2 minutes and 8 seconds, that, 13-second, period of the video. If you watch that, it's pretty funny. Like, in that part of the video, she's like having this kind of daydream, right, about following this person in this coat. And then she snaps back to reality, to the present moment. And then she looks around to get her bearings before she decides whether it's appropriate to smile or not, as she's on TV. She's like a newscaster lady in the music video, right? She's a journalist or whatever. Or one of those morning show girls, one of the main people. Like, not Joy Behar, but, one of those kind of people. And then she does at about 2 minutes and 6 seconds into the video. She looks around to decide whether to smile, and then she smiles. It totally cracks me up when I see that part of the video. It's hilarious. And that's how women really are, right? They don't worry about saying what is true. They worry about saying things that are, socially unacceptable to say. They worry about avoiding saying what is socially unacceptable to say. They don't stand on the side of truth. Women stand on the side of the crowd. That's another reason that it's important for MGTOW men to focus on making MGTOW such that it can grow as big as possible. Because the bigger that MGTOW gets, the more women will start to not speak out against it, and will in fact take MGTOW's side, because women are bandwagon jumpers, and they go wherever the societal trend is headed. In other words, women will support whatever it is advantageous for them to advocate, whatever is growing in power, because women do not want to get caught on the wrong side of the cultural shift. And thus they take the side of whatever movement is most powerful, and whichever movement's power is growing the fastest. But actually, the whole video is pretty good. The whole music video is pretty good, and the song grew on me. I thought it was okay at first, but then the more times I heard it, the more I liked it. Now I really like it a lot. It's actually a pretty good song, and I'm not even a Paramore fan. I've only liked one of their other songs. I think their first song, Misery Business. I liked that song, but I don't think I've heard any of their other songs and liked them. Other than that, I've not really liked any of their other songs, so I've only liked 2 of their songs over the years. I also like Hayley Williams' dancing at the end of the video when she's in red light, Satanist symbolism, and dancing on the table. It's pretty funny when Zach, the drummer, throws a football and hits one of the producers in the eye in the music video, and then points at the guy as if to say, "That's what you get." And let me also point out how Hayley Williams kind of circles her pussy with one of her hands as she's dancing. It's at about 4 minutes and 4 seconds, or 4 minutes and 5 seconds into the video, and it's really a quick little circle. You might not notice it at first, but I don't think it's an accident. By the way, that's not what I was referring to when I said that I liked her dancing. I like the other parts of her dancing shortly before that part. So I just kind of wanted to point out that little part about that music video that maybe you'll find interesting. This has been Redshift. I hope this video made you think, and if it did, then tell someone about this radical channel, and hit the thumbs up or the thumbs down button as is appropriate. Peace trucks.